I'm Alex Michelson. This week, the issue is California closing back down.
Do what you think is best, not only for you, but for the health of those you love.
Dr. Drew Pinsky on the science of coronavirus and the mixed messages sent by public health officials. And our panel this week, John Cobalt, Lisa Bloom, debating the politics of all this, of masks, of defunding the police, a Jeffrey Epstein update, and more. The Issue Is starts right now.
Broadcasting across California, California's only statewide political show. You're watching The Issue Is.
And welcome to The Issue Is. I'm Alex Michelson. This week in California, coronavirus cases are up. So are hospitalizations and ICU beds in use. So let's talk about the medical reality of all this with Dr. Drew Pinsky. Dr. Drew, my co-host for a nightly special report at 7 p.m. on Fox 11 Los Angeles. All that we talk about the coronavirus. Dr. Drew, welcome back to The Issue Is.
Thank you, sir.
All right, the governor shutting down indoor restaurants, other businesses in certain parts of the state. Good idea, necessary, sort of where are we at medically with all this?
We needed to do something. If we had had universal mask participation, if people had been absolutely diligent in the use of masks and social distancing, we probably would not be in this situation. But the reality is, we had demonstrations, we had people congregating in bars and restaurants, and now we're in a situation where we've got to do something.
This controversial decision to close beaches in a lot of areas, the governor not doing that across the state, but is closing parking lots. We asked him about that move on the phone. Here's what he had to say.
Can you explain to people that say, if you want us to not be indoors, isn't going to the beach a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, it is if you're not there with 250,000 others. And therein lies the problem. It's just the intensity of individuals all congregating on a smaller on a footprint that can't accommodate the physical and social distancing. So you're absolutely right. We want to encourage these outdoor activities, just encourage them in a way where we don't have descending masses of people all coming at the exact same time.
So for you, that makes sense.
It makes sense, particularly in the nighttime hours. When at the beach, you can sort of social distance, and we have the effects of UV rays and, of course, breezes that makes the transmission less risky. But as we pull back at nighttime and watch fireworks displays and are in a little more concentrated regions, unfortunately, it makes sense to me.
We are still seeing these protests in the street. We want to put up some video from this week. This was a protest that was happening outside of LA City Hall. And at the very same time, while this protest was happening outside LA City Hall, inside LA City Hall, the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, mayor of California's largest city, said this.
And I want to remind you, you still cannot gather in groups. Whether you think you can get together to celebrate something like a birthday with folks who are not in your household, even if you know them or related to them, that is still prohibited.
So both of us were frustrated by that messaging while the protest was still happening. Right. It leaves a lot of people confused and a lot of people not wanting to listen to him.
That's the problem. That's the problem. They have to apply their public health strategies across the board. A, if they don't, they will fail. And B, one of the most sensitive aspects of public health messaging is honesty and lack of hypocrisy, and never exaggerate. I must tell you, I've been through multiple waves. Most of my adult career has been spent trying to give health messages out. I call it the reefer madness excess. If you overstate something and the public population find out you've overstated or exaggerated or there was some hypocrisy in what you said, they will stop listening to everything, and thus now we have mask resistance.
And when you mean reefer madness, you're referring to marijuana.
Right, where the cannabis story was the risks were overstated, and then people found out, well, it's not so bad. We're not going to listen to the public health messaging anymore at all. Same thing with HIV. I was part of that. We said there's going to be 10 million dead. Well, that was an overstatement. Now to get somebody to wear a condom it's very difficult now. And now I'm seeing the same phenomenon happening with mask wearing and distancing because people are doubting the sincerity because there is inconsistency and hypocrisy in the messaging.
And of course, Dr. Fauci at the beginning of all this said, don't wear a mask.
To be fair to him, he's my hero, so I'm going to defend him a little bit. To be fair to him, we didn't have the data then, as Dr. Birx told you when you interviewed her. And two, we were trying to preserve masks at that point. As soon as we had both sets of data, that is, we could meet the needs of the frontline workers, and we knew there was a benefit to masks, they immediately changed course. And listen, clinical practice is about changing course. It's about learning about things.
Well, Dr. Birx, Dr. Fauci, both advising President Trump, he's not really listening to a lot of their advice when it comes to masks. Holding an event at Mount Rushmore without social distancing, masks not required there. Holding rallies recently, masks not required. What do you make of that?
Well, you and I, Alex, are asking for consistency. So his not wearing a mask, if he wants to take some risk, I think that's a mistake. He needs to lead by example with this. It's a very powerful message. But to allow congregations without social distancing and mask wearing, I don't care who's putting them on or what the purpose is, it is a gross mistake, and it will result in transmission. So we are asking for consistency, ladies and gentlemen. We are asking for people when they go into public. We're asking for our state to stand by this. Alex and I have been standing by this. When you go out in public in large gatherings, distance if you possibly can, and by all means wear a mask at all times. To not do so, you watch what happens here. It's not going to be pretty.
And of course, we're now seeing Secret Service agents who worked on some of those Trump rallies now testing positive for coronavirus.
There's going to be upticks wherever there are groups of people, period. It's going to happen.
Dr. Drew, great to see you. Thanks for sharing your views.
Thanks,
Up next, our panel, attorney Lisa Bloom, talk show host John Cobalt on mask fines, defund the police, Jeffrey Epstein, and more. And a reminder to log on to our website, theissueisshow.com, for past episodes, podcasts, and more. What would it mean to you, or the little girl version of Karen Bass, the thought of having a black woman as vice president? And when you were a little kid, could you even imagine that possibility?
Absolutely not. You know, it would just be so meaningful. And I think about all of the little girls who grow up and who will never think twice about the possibility because it will be normal and natural to them.
You can go to youtube.com/Alex Michelson and watch a conversation that we had with Congresswoman Karen Bass. She's now being vetted as a potential vice presidential pick for Joe Biden. We talked to her about that in a special hour-long town hall on Fox 11 Los Angeles. You can watch the thing in its entirety at youtube.com/Alex Michelson. We'll be right back.
We can see where this is going, and the most civic-minded thing to do, even if you are healthy, is to stay home, work from home.
So that was Lisa Bloom on our show back in March. She was the first panelist to join us remotely during the pandemic. She started quarantine about a month before everybody else did. At the time, some of us thought it was a little bit much, but it turns out she was way ahead of the curve on this one. Lisa joins us now from home, as does John Cobalt as well, our panel this week. Of course, Lisa, one of the best known attorneys in the world. She was recently in the news. She's always in the news. This one was for calling out the LAPD over their treatment of protesters. More on that a little bit later. John Cobalt, one of the most successful talk radio hosts in the history of California. He co-hosts the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640. You can also listen to it on the iHeartRadio app wherever you are. Welcome back to both of you. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
All right, so Lisa, you were right.
Say it again. Say it again. You know, I have so many people criticizing me all the time. Listen, and there's the new study, right, that the people who stayed home early, like me, well before the stay-at-home orders, probably saved a lot of lives and saved a lot of transmission of the virus. I'm sorry that I was right. I never imagined it would be this bad in the U.S. because I thought we would do what was necessary to crush the curve, and unfortunately we didn't do that. So I'm still here in the same place, working from home, just as I was in March, Alex.
Well, John, the science suggests that masks are really important in trying to bend that curve. The governor says everybody's got to wear a mask, but there isn't any enforcement mechanism for that statewide. Some cities now choosing to put fines in place. What do you think? How should we enforce this?
I don't think there's a way to enforce in California, 40 million people. There just isn't. You don't have enough police. You don't really have the will from law enforcement to do it. There are a lot of sheriffs who have been saying periodically they're not going to be trying to enforce this. They don't want the fights. They don't want to get into arguments with so many people in the public. I think a lot of people are rebelling. A lot of people have gotten fed up with all the scolding, and a lot of people just don't believe it still to this day.
John, do you believe it?
Do I believe it? Yeah, I do believe that if people wear masks, it'll cut the transmission. I think that's obvious. But what's fascinating is so many people don't want to accept that message or don't care.
Let's take this away from the language of scolding and let's talk about saving lives. People may not believe, but reality is there whether you believe in it or not. We have over 128,000 dead Americans. We don't need any more. But if people don't want to wear a mask and they want to be out there spreading a deadly virus that kills elderly and vulnerable people, let them contribute, because we're all paying for those hospital and healthcare costs, and they're putting healthcare workers at risk, which alone is enough reason to fine them.
John, what do you make of the leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom in this moment? Initially, he got so much praise for his reaction to the coronavirus. It's been a little bit more split in recent weeks.
Well, clearly, and I don't fault him or any politician, this virus has overwhelmed the whole country and much of the world. Newsom, he seems arbitrary to me. And we've talked about this before, not letting people go to the beach, but allowing the protesters to roam is, most people look at that and say, that's clearly not fair. If this is really a problem, they would have herded all the protesters indoors instead of allowing them to go on for weeks. And why can't I take my family to the beach?
Governor Newsom does not have the right to shut down protests because people have a First Amendment right to be out there protesting. And I've been to several of the protests. It's the only thing I've done outside of my home during the pandemic because it was very important to me. But he just doesn't have the power to do that.
It comes back to the fundamental unfairness people feel when they feel singled out to go to the beach when they've seen thousands and thousands do what they want in the streets. You can spin it any way you want about who has the power, but the average person at home says this isn't right.
When we all saw the video of George Floyd's murder, it was just too much for a lot of us to bear. People had to be out there protesting. For African Americans, racism is a health problem just as significant as COVID. And I applaud the Black Lives Matter protesters, the people who have been out there every day. People of color know they're at higher risk for dying of COVID, but they're out there every day. And that's tremendously important. And it's much more important than a nice day at the beach, which I think we all enjoy. But we're talking life or death for African American victims of police violence.
John, you have a response to that?
But if it spreads the disease, then innocent people are going to get it, including blacks and whites. Everybody can get the disease, so it has to be a medical issue that takes precedent in that particular case. Nobody should be spreading the
African Americans
disease.
are dying. They are being killed by police like Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, so many to name.
You can't use virtue signaling to deny that there's a health risk out there. It's a real risk. You've said so over and over again. Well, if it's a real risk, then it covers everybody at all times.
I agree with that.
Well, then, that's where a leader has to take a risk and say, look, I understand the reason for the protest. You are right. But at the moment, we've got a terrible disease, and that's going to add to the problem. And that's what a real leader does. He doesn't pander. He says, look, I know you don't want to hear this, and I know you're right, but still, this is really dangerous for a lot of people.
Well, I don't agree that's what leadership requires in this moment, because people have First Amendment rights. Martin Luther King was a civil rights protester. We now have a holiday named after him. That's how important civil rights protests are in this country.
Nobody said no one can protest. It's that this is clearly a health emergency. And clearly, having thousands of people bunched up together in the streets, a lot without masks, causes more spread of the disease.
John, to that point, are you concerned about President Trump holding big rallies, doing an event at Mount Rushmore, flying in the face of what his own scientists tell him to do?
Yes, and people shouldn't go. Seriously, I wasn't surprised that he got a small crowd in Tulsa because most people don't want to be in a big crowd.
I don't see how any intelligent person who cares about human life and getting us out of this crisis could possibly vote for Trump.
All right, that's going to have to be our last word. Up next, should we defund the police? John and Lisa debate that. If this debate was heated, we'll see what happens with that. But first, some music from DaBaby. This song is called Rockstar. It's one of the top trending videos on the internet all week. It's very topical right now.
protesters.
My God told me to promise you gon' squeeze me. You better let me go the day you need me. So bitch, put me on that get.
There is no excuse for a police officer to take a rubber bullet gun and shoot it at point blank range at the genitals of somebody at a protest.
Lisa Bloom representing that man who says he was injured by Los Angeles police during those recent protests. Lisa is back with us along with KFI's John Cobot. Lisa, let's start with you. What did you learn from that case, and what do you make of this whole concept of defunding the police?
Well, I represent 3 victims of police violence at recent Black Lives Matter protests. All of my clients were there simply to assert their First Amendment rights, unarmed, not bothering anyone. That man, Bradley Stein, was an anti-apartheid activist back in South Africa, moved to LA, had a quiet life, went to a protest, and he alleges that an LAPD officer took one of those rubber bullet guns, pointed it directly at his genitals at point blank range, and shot him, causing tremendous pain and a rupture of his testicle. So we are filing a lawsuit against the LAPD to try to clean all of this up. With regard to defunding the police, it is well past time to do that. I don't support completely abolishing the police, but we have to look at these military-style weapons that we are giving them, and also all of the jobs that we as the society are putting on their shoulders is just too much. They don't need to be doing mental health checks on people who aren't violent, for example. We don't need so many police in our schools.
Lisa at least goes into some detail of what she'd like changed. Most people don't. Most of the money obviously goes to police salaries, overtime, tremendous cost, their pensions. So what are we cutting here? Are we cutting the number of police, from 9,000 something to 7,000, 6,000, 4,000? What does that do to the 911 response time? There's no detail. There's no nuance. There's no reasonable public discussion on this.
Another issue that broke this week, Lisa, that I know you're intimately involved with, is this Ghislaine Maxwell, who is an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, arrested. You represent several alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Your reaction to her arrest and what you'd like to see going forward?
Yes, I represent 6 Jeffrey Epstein victims, and we have filed a lawsuit in New York and are fighting against the estate to get them full and fair compensation for what Epstein did to them. One of those 6 also has sexual misconduct allegations against Ghislaine Maxwell, who was arrested yesterday. And she's accused of really being sort of the madam, the mastermind. A lot of the girls and young women who were victims allege that they put their trust in her because she was a woman and she gained their trust and she groomed them and she was kind to them, only ultimately to get turned over for sexual abuse by Epstein, and sometimes they allege by Ms. Maxwell herself.
How do you keep her alive? The New York Post had the best idea today. They said put her in a glass cage with cameras and have a 24-hour streaming so that the whole world can watch her, so that what happens to her or what happens to Epstein doesn't happen to her. And I think I think the biggest story the average person is interested in, how many famous names are we going to hear about? And how many of those guys are either going to off themselves or try to get rid of Ghislaine Maxwell because of what's at stake?
All right, well, up next, a July 4th, unlike anything we've ever seen before. So how do we all process this moment? And as we go to break, this is where I lose the very, very little bit of journalistic credibility I have, and the musical theater kid comes out in honor of my all-time favorite show. All right, you ready for this? So we no longer have to wait for it, for the story of tonight. That's the story of Alexander Hamilton and Mr. Burr, sir. It's now streaming on Disney+. Filmmakers take us back inside the room where it happened, the Richard Rodgers Theater, with the original cast back in 2016 at the height of the show's run. So I'm not throwing away my shot to learn about the founding father without a father. And like my fellow Ham fans, I'm going to talk less, smile more, and finally feel satisfied. This is what 4th of July weekend usually looks like, but not this year. In most California cities, So how do we actually process this unique moment in American history? We welcome back our panel, Lisa Bloom, John Cobalt. John, let's start with you. How do we process this time?
Fireworks are gone, the parades are gone, so the specialness of the weekend is evaporated. I don't know. What I see, I think the most toxic thing in the whole country is social media. I think it's a sewer, it's a wasteland, and I think people now with all their free time are spending way too much time arguing with each other and scolding and screaming at each other. And this would be a good weekend to stay off your screens and stop engaging, because there's just a tremendous amount of exhausting nonsense every day out there.
Lisa, your thoughts on this unique moment?
Look, I've never liked fireworks. They're bad for the environment and they scare the crap out of my dogs every year who are under the bed shaking with fear. So I'm glad we don't have fireworks. I think this is a great time for everybody to think about our founding ideals. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. To continue your Hamilton reference, let's put women in this equal. So all men and women are created equal, and non-binary people. This is a time for us all to be serious and reflective. Let's get serious about fixing the problems in our country. The more that we can continue to do that, the better country we're going to be now and when we get out on the other side of this crazy pandemic.
Well, in this era of coronavirus, we can't dance together on set like we have before. So this is a reminder of some simpler times. That's John dancing with Lisa's mom, Gloria Allred. So Lisa, what do you think of the moves there?
My mom is an awesome dancer, and she always has a good time. And look at you having a great time, too. Yeah. It's also her birthday today, so I love you, Mom, and happy birthday. Mwah.
Lots of love for Gloria Allred. John, we love your wife, but Gloria's got to be your greatest ever dance partner, right?
The only one I've ever had on TV.
There we go.
Dancing with the Stars is next.
Dancing with the Stars is next. Thank you both. Great to see both of you. Really appreciate it. Happy 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next week, quite a show. He is the author of the best-selling book in America right now, The Room Where It Happened. John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor, will be here with us for a one-on-one interview. We close out this week with more Hamilton, the OG version of The Room Where It Happened from Hamilton, now streaming on Disney+.
No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens.